Hello and welcome back to lesson 4 of this introduction to designing for the web. In this lesson we shift our attention to the use of imagery on your websites. We'll be looking at how to select an image, how to improve an existing image, and where you can find good quality free imagery. But before we get into all of that, I want to share with you a few thoughts about the role of imagery on your website. One of the most common mistakes made by people starting out in web design is to think of imagery as something to add interest to a page, as eye candy, if you like. But imagery really shouldn't be used that way. Imagery should answer a user's question, because that's what a user wants. They want to have their questions answered, not to be impressed by your design abilities. As a result, imagery should be used if it supports the content in some way. Imagery should be used to communicate a message, explain a difficult concept, or visually demonstrate a point. For example, the imagery on this restaurant website I found on TemplateMonster shows off food and allows you to see exactly what you're going to get. These images answer a range of user questions, from what quality of food to expect to what type of food is going to be served. All that without reading a single line of text. But the imagery on that restaurant website does something else too. It makes you start to salivate. It looks alluring and delicious, at least if you're not a vegetarian. That's the other thing about good imagery. It should create an emotional reaction. It should sell your products and services. Take for example this surfing template. The images at the top of the page are inspirational, aren't they? Use this site and you will ride wicked waves and meet gorgeous women. At least that's what they want you to believe. But be careful with this approach. Creating an emotional response can be a dangerous game. It can make people feel manipulated, and that is never a good thing. Stick to imagery that truly represents what you're selling. By all means, sell a well-presented reality, but not an unachievable fantasy. But before we move on from the surfing website, I want to make one other observation about their choice of imagery. It's all very web-friendly. Let me explain what I mean. Imagery that works well in print doesn't always work well online, and there's several reasons for this. But probably the most important is resolution. When you view a printed photograph, you're typically viewing it at between 300 and 600 dots per inch. In other words, the image is very sharp, very crisp. You can see all of the details. Unfortunately, the majority of screens are running at a much lower resolution, normally around 72 dots per inch. And this creates a problem with highly detailed images. The details of these images start to break up and look pixelated. So for example, this picture of a crowd becomes increasingly hard to make out the smaller it gets. Add to this the compression that needs to be done on images to make sure they download fast, and it means that complex images just don't work very well on the web. Now let's look at those surfing images again. Notice that they all have a strong, large foreground element. This is ideal for the web because you can still make out what the photo is, even at a smaller size. Before we move on from making sure images are web friendly, I have to briefly mention about keeping image size small. As I've already said, we want our websites to download quickly. And one of the biggest things that can slow a website down is downloading of imagery. So, as a general rule of thumb, save your photography in a JPEG format at as low a quality as you can get away with without ruining the image. Also, resize your images so that they're the correct size for the context in which you're using them. Finally, use an online tool like compressor.io to save the files as efficiently as possible. So remember, when you're looking at imagery that you're going to use online, you're looking for something that's web friendly, enhances your message, and creates an emotional response. But where exactly do you go about finding all this imagery? First, let me be clear about what you cannot do. You can't simply search on images in Google and help yourself to whatever you find. Most images you're going to come across are copyright protected, and so using them is going to get you and your client into a lot of trouble. One option is to create your own imagery. You can take your own photographs or use tools like Infogram to create infographics. But please, for the sake of good design everywhere, don't resort to clip art. It's such a bad idea. If creating your own imagery feels like a recipe for disaster and you've got a bit of budget available, then consider stock photography. Stock photography has got a bad reputation amongst designers, but it's not all bad. You just need to avoid cliches like businessmen shaking hands or smiling models looking into the camera. Instead, look for images that are a bit more unusual, really. Maybe something taken from an interesting angle, or maybe something even a little bit more abstract. Don't feel all your imagery has to be literal. Take, for example, this cricket club template on TemplateMonster. I absolutely love their choice of imagery. Sure, there's the stereotypical photos of people playing cricket, but they also have got more interesting shots, detailed shots of cricket balls, bats and helmets. And these kinds of imageries help the design be interesting, and it varies the kind of imagery that's being used. Of course, if budgets are tight, stock imagery might not always be an option. Fortunately, there are many people out there who have released their photographs under a public domain license, and that means that we can all make use of those imagery for free. The problem has always been finding those images. It's not easy. Fortunately, there are now some great sites out there, sites like Pixabay, that allows you to search for public domain imagery just as you would any stock photography. If you want to take your imagery to the next level, consider creating a consistent theme across your imagery. For example, that cricket club site have mainly used close-up imagery, and that's tied all of the imagery together and made them look like they belong on the same site. There are lots of ways of giving imagery a consistent theme. You could apply a colour overlay to your imagery, like the fishing site we mentioned in the last video. Notice the blue-green tints on the image. Or helps to tie all of those disparate images together with a consistent look and feel. You could go a step further and try applying a filter to your photographs like you get on programs like Instagram. From making all your photographs black and white to increasing the contrast, these filters can help to provide a consistent tone to your imagery. Best of all, there's no shortage of tools out there that allow you to quickly and easily apply filters to your photographs. There's even a web-based tool you can use called PicMonkey. Finally, don't stop at filters. Simply cropping a photograph in an interesting way can be amazingly effective. Even the most boring of photos can look interesting if cropped well. But a word of warning with all this editing, it's easy to go too far, to add too strong a filter or add too much of a colour overlay. My recommendation is to maybe try out some different filters and different approaches and then show them to another designer to get some honest feedback on whether you've gone too far. So that's it for this lesson. If I can leave you with just one thing, it would be to make sure that the imagery you use serves a purpose. You can have lovely imagery and gorgeous filters, but if the imagery is just eye candy, it achieves nothing. Imagery should either elicit an emotional response from the user or even better answer a question they have. You have to make your imagery work hard, and that's the key. Right, next time on this introduction to designing for the web, we're going to look at more of the details of design, elements that maybe most users don't even notice but are really important. Elements like textures and styling. But until then, thanks for watching.